All right, we are on video module. It's a great question. 83, I think. Should be 83. And we're going to go over just some real basic summaries of some other stuff that we've gone over in the past, and kind of tie this whole training up. And then what we'll do in our last training is zip forms and DocuSign and buyer cost review. So this video module is going to start with just a summary again of things we talked about before. So buyer negotiation of property inspections.
Mm-hmm.
So do you remember, Andrew, in the when we talked about property inspections in the agreement of sale? Do you remember how many what the three options were that a buyer has when they're after the inspection period's up? So that inspection period can be 10 or 15 days, and the buyer typically has three decisions they can make within that time. Do you remember what they were?
In terms of getting inspections and stuff kind of scheduled, or
so no, scheduled.
Mm-hmm.
They have the whole program or the whole inspections are scheduled, and then by the end of that period, the buyer has to decide one of three choices.
Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking it is once those things happen, it's either accepting the property.
Accepting the property?
Yep. It is. Is it paying for if things don't work out and there's some type of pay for the property fixes on your own?
They can accept the property, which is paying for it on their own.
Okay.
The second one is the opposite of they can totally
forget it.
Walk away. Get
Yep.
their money back. We're done. Or three, which is kind of a compromise between accept and walk away. They can enter into a proposal with the seller.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about buyer's negotiation of property inspections, there's this whole other part of the job. We've talked about a huge part of the job being prospecting and new business development. And then there's the search and service part when you actually get a client and you do an appointment and they agree to work with you. You do a buyer presentation. Now you're finding them property and you're showing it to them. And then you write the offer and you present it. And then you go away for a minute. And then there's this whole other part of the job that you come back in the transaction at the time of the inspection. Because once you get it under contract, you give it to the transaction coordinator and she schedules everything. And then you're kind of underground for a few minutes with this, or a few days with this client. And then the inspections come back and you're back to the surface working with them for a day or two. And your ability to do that job well will be a function of customer satisfaction and how many transactions you hold together and how many fall apart. And so this is a conversation about how to make sure you're properly educating a buyer on the inspection process, and then how you're responding when the reply to inspections comes about. And so the first thing to keep in mind is that when you're showing them the property, we always want to be thinking ahead and planting the seeds and keeping expectations pretty low. So you'll hear the conversation, and this is the conversation you should be having with them, and you'll hear other agents have it. They'll say something to the effect of, that it comes up like, so do we do home inspection or something? Yeah, that's your trigger. Yeah, home inspection we do, and some other contingencies. And basically how it works is, and you're just always educating them about what's going to happen next, because it removes the uncertainty from the process. And you're explaining to them, when we do inspections, the inspector's going to be there for like 3 or 4 or even 5 hours. And, we always encourage people to attend and, hang out, and they can ask the inspector questions while they're there. Because ultimately, if you don't attend, either way, you're going to get a report emailed to you. And the report's going to be like 30 pages long. and it's going to have a summary of all the problems with the house. And usually that summary is anywhere from 10, 15, 20 items long.
Mm-hmm.
That's very typical. Most houses have a bunch of odds and ends that are problematic. That's part of home ownership. But what you're looking for in that report are the big ticket items, the deal killers, the roof replacements, the structural problems, the furnace needs totally replaced. Those are the things that are going to really put you under financial duress if that happens and you buy this property and you need those big repairs. And so, don't be alarmed if there's a bunch of odds and ends. We'll talk through it. And then ultimately we'll make a decision either to move forward, walk away if there's too big of a problem we can't solve, or enter into a proposal with the seller. Does that all make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So what we've essentially done is we've explained what is bound to happen so that when it does happen, they don't say, and I've seen it all. I've seen it where they attend the inspection and they're like, they have this image of the inspection of a half an hour walkthrough with some builder, contractor. And when they see them there, like taking pictures and writing everything down for 4 hours, they think this house is like a lemon.
Right.
It's not at all. It's just it's like what it normally is, 4 hours long.
Mm-hmm.
Or when they get a report back and it's 30 pages long and has 20 odds and ends on it, they're like, oh my gosh, this house is falling apart. But really, when you look at those odds and ends, they're like, there's chipping paint on the porch railings. There's the gutter in the back is rusted out. The shed has some rot around the door trim. The water heater needs a pressure relief valve to be up to code. There's a radon problem, and there's a little bit of moisture on the one side of the basement wall. All of these items are very normal in a home inspection. And if you have a first-time home buyer who sees that for the first time and they haven't been prepped by you, chances are their emotions are going to be through their head. Right. We made a bad decision. This isn't the house for them. And they walk. And the problem is, and I'm okay with people walking if it's the right thing to do, but the problem is the next house they buy is going to have the same crap attached to it, right? The same stuff. And so it's our job to educate them. And so preparing mentally for the inspections is a big part of the process. The next phase of the process is when the inspections come back. You're the buyer. I'm the agent. So I prepped you for all this in the beginning. Then when we scheduled the inspections, I called you the day before and I said, hey, Andrew, just wanted to follow up. Your inspections are tomorrow, which is really cool. I know we talked about it before, but an inspector will probably get there around 8:30. Hopefully you can be there so you can chat with them and ask them some questions that he wouldn't necessarily be able to write on the report. You can kind of get the inside scoop, which is good. Might last like 4 hours. That's totally normal. And then usually within a day or two, he'll give you an eye report, about 30, 40 pages long. Typically have 15, 20 odds and ends, problematic items on it. We'll talk through those together. Most of them are part of home ownership, very normal. We'll be looking for if there's any big ticket items. If there are, we'll talk about our options and, see what the seller, if they're willing to participate in any of them. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there if there are any big ticket items. So I'm re-prepping you the day before. And then you do the inspection. I might message you or call you later that day and just say, hey, just want to see if you had any questions on the inspection this morning, anything glaring, any like big heartburn or anything like that. Or if you don't get to them in time and the report gets emailed to you and to you and your client, at the time of that email, I probably pull it up on my screen, look over the inspections, and then I probably get an idea of what it was, and then I call you and say, hey, just wanted to check in. I had a brief chance to look over the inspections, but not in any detail. Did you have any glaring questions? I should be able to look over it in a little more detail tonight. I want to hear what your temperature is. As your agent, I want to learn. Before I give you any recommendation, I need to understand what your temperature is. So that's how I'm going to phrase it. I'm going to say, hey, I didn't get a chance to look over it in detail, but I just wanted to check your temperature and see if you had any glaring questions as you're talking over it with your wife. Hopefully I'll be able to review it in more detail tonight, and then we can chat tomorrow about stuff. But did you have anything, right away that stood out that you wanted me to look into? And I'm either going to get like, oh my gosh, we're really concerned about this, and I'm going to get this feeling of like, or I might get, yeah, everything went fine, I don't really have any questions, or I might get, everything went pretty well, but he mentioned something about radon, and there could be a termite problem. Is that serious? And so that's the point where I'm taking notes, because then I am going to go back and read it in more detail. I'm going to say, all right, let me look into that stuff, and then how about we schedule time to chat and go over next steps, tomorrow around 1 p.m. And then I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to get back on the phone with you and just say, hey Andrew, I looked back over it last night, and I see what you mean about the radon. I see what you mean about the termites, and I see what and I picked out 2 or 3 things that aren't major problems, but might be worth inquiring about. And then from there, we're going to decide. I'm going to say, our option with anything is to accept property, move forward, walk away, or enter into mutually acceptable, thing, ask the seller for some help. Now, I'm gauging from you, Andrew, that this radon really concerns you, and I would agree with that, and I think that's something we should ask for, and that these 5 things, you're not too concerned about at all. These other 2 things, like the toilet is loose on the 2nd floor, and the outlets within 6 feet of a water source aren't GFCI protected, so they're not grounded, and there's a double tapped breaker in the breaker box. It sounds like something that it wouldn't be a deal killer for you, but it's kind of creates a little heartburn. Is that about right? Yes, that sounds right. Well, then I think what I'd recommend is, I know it's not a deal killer for you about the double tap breaker and the GFCI outlet and the loose toilet, but let's start by asking for all 3 of those things to be fixed, and definitely the radon. That sounds like a deal killer. So let's start with, all right, we'll buy your house, Mr. Seller, but you need to fix this radon if we're going to move forward, because this concerns us, and update the outlets within 6 feet of a water source that aren't ground fault protected, and tighten that toilet, and whatever the other one was. And then we would put that in a what's called reply to inspection, and we would sign it, and we would send it to the other agent, and I would call them, and I would present it in a collaborative way, and I might say something effective. Hey, my client, the inspections went okay. There are some issues that they're pretty concerned about, but I was able to talk through them, and to represent you, I might say, I'll send you a copy of the summary sheet. There's about 12 items on the whole sheet. They were going to ask for everything, or they were leaning that way, but I talked to them, and there's 4 or 5 items they're just willing to do on their own. You'll see them on there. They're more minor. But what they are more concerned about is making sure the radon's done and retested, and then the GFCI outlet and the double tap breaker is done. So talk to your seller, and let me know what their thoughts are, if they're okay with those items. And then if they come back and said, yeah, they're fine with it, we would get all them done, and I would give you good news. If they said, we're only doing the radon, I would say, hey, unfortunately, they weren't willing to do the other 2 things. Those weren't deal killers for you, but they are willing to do the radon. And so so the process there was, I learned what your temperature was. I then spoke to the issue that you were concerned about, and added a couple issues that I might be concerned about and recommend beyond what you were looking for. So under promise, over perform. And then I made sure, it's good to make sure to let you know that, yeah, I realize these aren't deal killers for you, so if we don't get them, no big deal, but let's ask for them. And if we get them, we get them. And then I presented them with a posture of, and again, under promise and over perform, there's all these items. My buyer is willing to overlook these 5, which you didn't care about at all. But really, these other 4 they're pretty concerned that they want done. And I didn't tell them that you aren't even that concerned about these 2 or 3.
Right.
And so I'm landing at a place with them where I'm starting. They could have asked for all this, but instead they asked this, hoping that I can get you all of those things, which is essentially more than what you wanted. So under promise to you, and then hopefully overperform. If I can't get you more than what you wanted, they're still going to land at what you wanted, which is the radon, right? And so there's a bit of an art to the under promise, overperform, negotiation. And it starts with the client and learning what their needs are, and then going beyond what their needs are in my head trying to get you more than what you wanted, but telling you you might only get what you wanted. I'll do my best. I can't guarantee this, but we're gonna even shoot for a couple extra things. And then when I posture, I'm like doing it in a way that I'm pretty confident I'm going to get you more than what you wanted. And then I'm almost definitely confident I'm going to get you at least what you wanted. So there's a lot of overlap there in learning what your client wants and then setting their expectations low and then getting them more than what they asked for. And then when you do that effectively, everyone's celebrating. Their client's like, oh my gosh, that's great. I'm so glad. And the way that I presented it to the seller that they could have asked for 20 things. But we were able to talk, and we only asked for like 9. Right? And so the seller hopefully is if their agent's presenting it well, it's like, they kind of let us off easy. So we're constantly playing with all the variables to create a win-win. I want a win for my client and a win for the seller. If the total other way to do that, I know I'm throwing a lot at you right now, but the other way to do that, and I see it all the time, is no conversation around what the inspections are like. And so they go into it with no expectations. The buyer doesn't go to the inspection, so it gets no context. They get emailed a report. It's 35 pages long. It has a bunch of stuff in it, and they freak out. And the agent says, whoa, in an effort to hold it together, because the agent's desperate, and they're totally reactive and not proactive. They say, well, let's just ask for it all. Let's just ask for it. Worst they can say is no. And the buyer's emotional, so the only thing that's going to keep them happy at this point, because they're not educated on what all this is now they're like, well, if I'm buying this, I want everything fixed. And so the agent takes the report and they send it to the other agent and they say, the only way he's going to be happy is if you fix everything. Well, it's not even remote. Like, the seller feels like they're slapped in the face. Or like, are you kidding me? Like, he wants me to, he just got me $5,000 down on price, and now he wants me to replace that little rust spot. And I mean, that's what else? Where's it going to end? And now you have this animosity, and if at best it's going to be held together, and they're going to be not happy with each other. At worst, it's going to fall apart, and now they're both going to be unhappy with the whole process, right? Whereas if you prep everyone properly and educate, and then underpromise and overperform, you can create a win-win and have a happy seller and a happy buyer and a happy agent and a happy agent. And that's the goal. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.